All right, so this week I've got something pretty cool. It's a really neat text effect that I actually got, not surprisingly, from a movie poster I saw recently, and I just really liked the effect. It was really kind of cool, and it is really quite simple, and it uses smart filters in a very interesting way. So here I have just a blank document, and I'm going to need to start with some text, of course. So let's go over here and grab our text tool and not crop the image. Grab my text tool, it's going to click inside to set some text. And since this is kind of going to be a retro looking text, we'll actually do the word retro. How about that? And I'm just going to scale it up, use my free transform and use my shift key to scale it up proportionately. That may be too big. Let's scale it down just a little bit more. Now, I want to change the type of the text, or the actual font style, of course, because that doesn't look retro. That looks boring. So let's go ahead and double click on that text layer to highlight the text, and I'm going to go and look for this font right here. Is actually one I got off the DaFont site. It's dafont.com, and it's a free font called Oliver, and it's got a cool little retro wave look to it. I thought it was really neat. And that text is set. Now, I don't want to edit the text itself. What I want to do is actually turn the text into paths that I can manipulate to create my overall text effect. So right on that text layer with it highlighted, I'm going to hold down my control key and then click on this menu and go right here to create work path. And you'll see it's gone in and generated the paths on here. Let's turn off that text layer so we can see what's going on. So there are the paths. If I look in the paths panel, there's that layer right there. Let's go ahead and double click on it and save it just in case we make any changes we don't want to do. So now let's manipulate the text individually. Well, first thing I'm going to do is start with this letter R. I'm going to select that, press Command or Control T, and I'm going to scale this up quite a bit, just so it's a little bit more prominent. But before I commit that change, I'm going to Control or right click on it, and we're going to go in here and choose Warp, and give this a little bit more character by warping it a little bit. Yes, you can in fact warp vector paths right here inside Photoshop, just like you would any other shape. Very, very, very cool. So I think I like that. Let's go ahead and leave that there and let's position that. Now I'm going to drag and select all the rest of the letters and do a very similar thing. But actually, before I do that, let's deselect that and let's just kind of nudge these a little closer together. Just a little bit. So now let's drag and select all those, press Command or Control T, and again we're going to go into the Control or right click on that and go to Warp. And let's just give this kind of a little bit of an interesting wave to it. Just so it's a little bit, it's got a kind of a retro organic feel to it. It's not so straightforward text like we're probably normally used to seeing. And we'll just kind of commit that change, and that looks pretty good. So it's already got that kind of retro look to it just by creating that path and then manipulating it. Now, why did I create the path and manipulate it? It's resolution independent. No matter what kind of distortion I have applied to these paths, I'm going to have ultimately clean edges when I go ahead and make the selection and fill it with a color, which we're going to do right now. So let's go ahead and create a new blank layer, and I'm going to press Command Enter, and it's going to load all those paths as a selection. And I'm just going to use a temporary color for now. Let's go ahead and press Shift Delete, and we'll use 50% gray, and there we have that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a duplicate of that layer. So we have two versions of this. So let's turn off that duplicate for now and concentrate on this one right here. I'm going to apply a layer style to this. So let's go into the layer style menu, and we're going to do a stroke. And I want to change the color, of course. So let's go over here and go and sample that actual gray. And we're going to make this size pretty big. Let's go with about 15 pixels. You can see right there, it kind of just makes those letters a lot fatter. And we're going to leave it to the outside, and everything looks good. Click OK. So I've expanded that out. I want to commit this. So I'm going to create a new blank layer beneath this. I'm going to Command or Control click on that new layer icon, reselect that layer, and just simply press Command or Control E. It merges it down and commits that layer style. But got a few holes here I need to fill in. You notice you got some areas here. Let's make a lasso selection here. I'm going to hold my Shift key down and add that area there. Let's get a little bit of this letter here and right here. Press Shift Delete, 50% gray, and there we have our background shape. So let's go ahead and turn on this layer up here. So let's start to separate these with some colors so we can differentiate them. I'm I'm going to lock the transparency of this background layer and grab this dark red color and simply press Option Delete, and it's going to go ahead and fill that in. And I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to lock the transparency on here, and we're going to use this kind of yellowish orange color right here, and let's just go ahead and fill that in. So, looking pretty good. I'm liking it so far. So, what do we want to do now? Well, we want to apply some really cool effects to the actual yellow lettering. And this is where smart filters come in. Now, when you create or prepare a layer for smart filters, it's the exact same thing as turning it into a smart object. And you can either do that, you can either go into the layer and do right here, where is it? Smart objects, convert to smart object. You can do that, or go right into the filter menu and go to convert for smart filters. It does the exact same thing. It turns it into a smart object. So now let's apply some filters. I'm going to go into the filter menu, go down here to noise, add noise. And we're going to do 200 Gaussian monochromatic. Clicks OK. Doesn't look that great, does it? This is why I like smart filters. You see all these options that have appeared over here? Well, I'm going to go over here into this little icon right here and double click on that, and it's going to allow me to change the blending options. So let's change the blend mode of this filter. Notice we're just affecting the filter, not the actual object on the layer itself. So I want the filter itself to blend using an overlay mode. And look at the change. We're already looking pretty good. So let's click OK. And let's do one more thing. Here on the smart filter layer, you'll notice that we have a layer mask, which means we can actually use paint with black or white to remove or hide or reveal different parts of the filter. Not the layer, but the filter. So with that filter layer mask highlighted, I'm just simply going to go under the filter menu. Actually, first, let's set our default colors to black and white. Go under the filter menu, go down here to render clouds. And you can see it's kind of made that text a little bit less prominent in there. Just giving a little bit of variation there. In fact, we could probably go in there and hold down our option key. If we go under filter again and do render clouds, it'll remove a little bit more. Probably didn't want to remove that much. So it's just, you can see it's getting very subtle fading in and out here and there. So it's just not a solid field of noise. It's kind of varying around there. All right, so we're almost there. What I'm going to do now is apply a layer style to this text. So let's go over here and into the layer style menu, we're going to choose stroke once more. We're going to do something a little bit differently here. In the fill type, we're going to choose pattern. And inside the pattern menu, we're going to use this default one right here. It's got kind of a liquidy look to it. But let's change something. We're going to take the size down to 1, and we're going to put this on the inside. And notice how it's giving me kind of a shiny look to it, almost like it's got a metallic edge to it. Pretty cool stuff. Let's increase the scaling a little bit just to make that toning a little bit more, a different range to it. And I do believe that looks pretty good, but I want to add one more thing. We're going to add a gradient overlay, and it's got the default black and white. I'm going to change that blend mode to overlay as well, and you'll notice the variation of color we're getting there. Very, very nice. Okay, so I think I'm done there. And again, these are layer styles. We can go back in there and modify them and change them any way we want. It's okay. Now, I do want to add a drop shadow to this, but I don't want to do it in the normal sense that you might think by including it in these effects here. I'm going to load this text as a selection. Hold down my command key and click the new layer icon. It pops a new layer beneath that active layer. And with black set as my background color, I'm going to press Command Delete, and it will fill that area with that. So I turn this layer off there. You can see it's filled with black. And what I want to do is run a blur on this. We're going to go into the filter menu, go to Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll do about a 3-pixel blur. That looks pretty good. And here's what we're going to do differently. I'm going to press Command or Control T, and I'm going to go into that menu and choose the warp. And I'm just going to, at certain points, push this shadow in varying directions. With the warp, we can do that. I can push it a little bit over here on this side, maybe bring it up a little bit to the top here, just some varying positions of that, just so it's not like a regular drop shadow where it's just offset to the side. So I'm going to commit that change, but I'm going to add one more thing to this. I'm going to go into there and actually add a drop shadow to this drop shadow. I know that sounds weird, but that's what we're doing. I'm going to have the angle coming in from this other side. So you notice the difference. It's just enhancing that shadow a little bit more. We could probably dumb this down to about 50%. And it just gives a little bit more dimension to that. Looks pretty good. Okay, so one last thing we need to add. I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer. And we're going to go into our toolbar, grab the brush tool. Let's make white our foreground color. I'm going to go in here into my brush engine. Now, if you don't have this loaded, go into the flyout menu and choose assorted brushes and just append it to your existing list. And you're going to look for these little sparkle brushes right here, just like that. And what I'm going to do is make that a little bit bigger. Let's go into our brush options, activate shape dynamics, and now I'm going to turn off the pen pressure, but I am going to take the size jitter all the way up to 100. So as I paint, it gives me a different size all around. And this is what this is going to do is enhance those metallic looking edges on the text, giving this a kind of a glittery, almost like a disco look to it. It's got that retro feel to it. It gives me kind of that disco look. Very, very cool stuff. So that's just about it. That's just creating very simple text and then creating very compelling retro looking text out of that. Now, one last thing I want to add here. On that bottom layer, I'm going to create a new layer, blank layer above that one. Let's go into that gradient tool. Using this rainbow gradient and making sure it's a linear, I'm just going to hold down my shift key and drag out from the center and apply that gradient. Go into the filter menu, go to blur, motion blur. Give us a crazy blur. Leave the angle at 0 so it's straight left to right, and then take this up to about 600. And it gives me an interesting color effect in that background, and we can go ahead and fill this out a little bit more, giving me that really cool retro look all right there inside Photoshop.